Hello, and welcome to Anime Audio Commentary. Today I'll be commenting on episode 3 of My Hero Academia. If you'd like to watch along, then start watching now. So, just to recap things a little bit, this is actually some interesting information we didn't really get before regarding All Might, that not a whole lot is known about him, despite ostensibly being the most popular superhero in the world. Regardless of that, his effects are quite pronounced on reducing crime and just fostering a better world. So that he was in such a state as he is, physically and emotionally, is rather unfortunate. That Midoriya was able to sort of snap him out of that to some degree, I think, says a lot about his capability or capacity to actually become a hero, regardless of the logistics involved in having superpowers. Now that's a real twist right there. So for Midoriya, I'd imagine something like this is perhaps the biggest twist, he could possibly hope for. That Midoriya would be able to inherit the superpower of the greatest superhero in the world, that's like a dream come true. Naturally, it doesn't make much sense on its face, given that quirks are essentially genetic mutations. But given that All Might has never really made the details of his powers clear by design, it's very interesting that he's sort of obfuscating this sort of inherent inheritability of his power. So I do think it's very interesting that he was sort of trying to foster this myth that somebody as great as him was, born like this naturally, and it's not the case. I'm of two minds about it, because on the one hand, everything's sort of founded on a lie, but I guess the idea is that a hero who was born like this, they are, I guess, above others in that, they were born just and good, therefore they are beyond doubt. But I guess the idea is that, I don't know. See, the more I think about it, the more it seems like kind of a bad idea. Granted, the whole inheriting the quirk thing, that's kind of dubious too, but I guess if the idea was that he worked for it and became this, You know, that would be a more hopeful sort of message to spread, that other people can become just as great as him. Well, I guess for better or worse, you know, he didn't do that. He sort of played it up as though he was this superhuman paragon basically from the beginning. So this is interesting, you know, sort of unbeknownst to him, Midoriya has essentially bumped himself to the front of the line here in terms of being All Might's successor. You know, he'd been looking for one, and he hasn't presumably found anybody worth it. But, you know, that act of heroism was enough to convince All Might that perhaps he is truly worthy. So I feel like Midoriya is sort of rushing into things to a degree. You know, he doesn't know exactly what's going to be required of him. But on the other hand, you know, just sort of jumping right in on impulse, that's sort of, more of a heroic thing to do. So I'm wondering why precisely All Might has decided to transform just for this sort of one-on-one training here. Seems like maybe, he's sort of wasting that 3-hour time limit. So it would seem as though this is the start of the training. You know, if Midoriya wants that superpower, he's got to, well, he's got to train himself first, you know. If you just give a superpower to a weak person, that doesn't necessarily make them strong. So it's nice that they're sort of addressing the drawbacks of superpowers. You know, super strength is good and all, but if you're not super durable too, you can't exactly like punch holes in concrete without shattering your arm. So it seems like the idea here is that if Midoriya, and specifically his body, isn't prepared for it, he will swiftly destroy himself. So it would seem as though All Might has a bit of a dual purpose here. You know, on the one hand, this is physical training. Midoriya needs to get fit. But at the same time, you know, this beach, it's basically a trash dump, and it shouldn't be. So, you know, it's kind of convenient in a way, you know. Midoriya can do a public service by removing trash from this beach, and at the same time, he can become more fit while doing so. I mean, it's a pretty reasonable thing to do, and when All Might frames it as, you know, doing this will help you become a hero, it's pretty good motivation. And it's not entirely unfounded either. You know, I worked at a warehouse for a little while, and the job was basically like hauling around various types of recyclable material. And, you know, like, I lost some weight and gained some muscle just by doing my job there. You know, something like this isn't entirely dissimilar. You know, obviously Midoriya's not going to get like an All Might tier physique just by hauling trash around, but seeing as how he's like, you know, a skinny teenager, he'll certainly bulk up at least a little bit. So All Might is really taking this seriously. You know, he's developed an entire schedule. You know, when you wake up, when you go to bed, when you eat, what you eat, when you work out. At least Midoriya sort of knows what he's getting in for. You know, he recognizes that as somebody who's never had a quirk, he's definitely going to have to work for it. And it's certainly going to be difficult, you know, like, just looking at all the trash, all the various types of trash, you know, some of it is certainly impossible for a normal person to just, like, lift and move unaided, you know. Things like shelving units and, like, refrigerators or ovens. Granted, you know, if you have super strength, that's one thing. So in addition to moving all the trash and everything, Midoriya still has to attend school. And, there's all sorts of tropes about Japanese high school, some of which I'm sure are based in real life about how you have to do a whole lot of studying and there's after-school stuff that's not strictly mandatory, but, strongly encouraged, if you know what I mean. So, between all that and working out, Midoriya's gotta have, his day regimented down to, the half hour. Surely he's not gonna have any free time to do anything else. I mean, nobody really knows exactly what he's going through. The teacher just sort of plays it off hey, pay attention, kid, but I would argue if he wants to get into UA, this training with All Might is certainly a lot more important. You have to have the grades, too, because presumably it is a school, but I don't know. It's one of those things where, yeah, it's a school, but the heroism is more important, and if you're focusing on the academic side of it, you're almost sort of missing the forest for the trees. But, this is a nice montage showing him working, rain or shine at all hours of the day, swimming, hauling trash, lifting weights, eating lots of food, and, it's subtle, but he is sort of bulking up a bit. I'm almost reminded of, that trope about, boxing movies in a way where, the coach rides on a bike or something while the athlete runs and carries heavy weights, or shadow box or something like that. So I'm wondering if this is sort of the first sign of a pattern here. Midoriya is sort of deviating from the plan a little bit. He's sort of overdoing things. He's going beyond, and I know just enough about fitness that if you overwork your body too much, it has deleterious effects, if you're lifting heavy weights, you have to rest to allow your muscles to repair themselves and become stronger. So on the one hand, you can't really fault his enthusiasm, but he's not exactly following recommendations, decidedly to his detriment. And to be fair to Midoriya, it's not like All Might said, you absolutely cannot do more than what I'm giving you. I mean, it's not like he's admonishing too much, All Might certainly appreciates the willingness to work hard. And that's an important trait. But, it is interesting looking back that given all I know about My Hero Academia, that, this sort of dynamic between All Might and Midoriya, it's already sort of forming at the very beginning here. So, in the end, it seems like everything is paid off. Not only has Midoriya cleaned the beach, he's cleaned some of the areas around it. And he's getting pretty jacked in doing so. So, if this doesn't give him, a decent chance, frankly, I don't know what will. So now here comes the really important part. Yeah, he's taken a little, expressway to getting super fit. And that's all well and good, but he still doesn't have the superpower yet. So, that's the important thing now. Of course, All Might has talked about that this is merely the beginning. This is sort of like the baseline you need in order to wield the superpower, but I don't know, if this level of fitness is the starting point, then there's definitely going to be a lot of work ahead of both of them. There's another little interesting thing here that Midoriya is still constantly worried about being worthy, and it's not that All Might doesn't assuage his fears, but he just sort of laughs it off, it's like, are you really still worried? It's like, we did all this, surely you shouldn't be too worried. So, this is something that I think is kind of interesting, that in order to assimilate the quirk, you need to eat a bit of genetic material, in this case, a hair. That's, it opens interesting lines of inquiry, but not in the ways that you would think, because I do believe it was mentioned before, or rather, it gets mentioned later that, the person giving the quirk has to be willing to do so, otherwise it doesn't work. So, that sort of closes off this plot line of, somebody figuring out Midoriya's secret, stealing a hair and eating it, and stealing his powers. That might have been interesting, but I guess I can kind of see why nobody went through with something like that, or why it wasn't written that way. So it's interesting that even though he has ostensibly inherited the powers, he doesn't feel any meaningful changes. And that's what kind of unsettles me about this, One would think that All Might would at least give him a primer on how to use the power and actually using the power before you have to use it in a real situation. Not that using it in an entrance exam is necessarily a real situation, but, suppose he got attacked by, a supervillain, say, and the only opportunity to get out alive was to defend himself, You don't want to use your brand new superpowers for the first time in a high-pressure situation. Ah, boy. Yeah, the poor guy, talking to girls. Yikes. Man, I really don't miss this sort of aspect about high school, being a nervous guy and not wanting to, talk to girls despite wanting to. So I guess they have sort of accurately portrayed the aspect of school where the teachers try to be cool and it falls entirely flat. I really don't miss that either, come to think of it. So, what's interesting is that this guy is an actual hero, and Midoriya is fully aware of who he is and his reputation and all that. But this sort of smacks to me of having, a celebrity as a teacher, which, I mean, in an instance like this, who better than an actual superhero to teach superheroes? But at the same time, I feel like his celebrity status sort of gets in the way. Now, it's interesting that even though Bakugo and Midoriya, like, they don't really get along, they do sort of interact a lot, you know? Or at the very least, Midoriya is trying to be cordial. So, here we have the entrance exam. You know, they're going to be dropped into a mock city block and fight robots. The idea being that they're stand-ins for villains. So I guess the idea is they want to see how the prospective students use their powers and I guess how they can act in a real pressure situation. So already, you know, it seems like there's some animosity among the students. You know, some people are taking things very seriously, perhaps to, I don't know, the chagrin of the proctors. You know, I can't imagine President Mike here is too happy about the interruption, but it did ultimately reveal some interesting information that there is a fourth robot worth no points, and it is explicitly to be avoided. I mean, it seems like, to me, that's sort of antithetical to the purpose of a superhero school. You know, there's this thing, it's a threat, you get nothing for beating it, you should avoid it. You know, it seems to me that that sort of fosters the wrong kind of attitude. But, you know, perhaps it's the point. If anybody's sort of gullible enough to fall for that, then they don't belong. Yeah, you know, thinking about it, I feel like just sending Midoriya to this test right away is really not a good idea, because he's only done sort of physical training as a normal person. I guess, you know, All Might really values this sort of impromptu impulsiveness, but, you know, it doesn't always set you up for success. Alright, well that's it for this episode. If you've enjoyed it, then by all means, tune in for the next one. See you, Space Cowboy.